Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organization create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your host, Mark Bidwell.
Hello, welcome back to episode 2 of season 3 of the Innovation Ecosystem podcast. If this is your first time listening, welcome. My name is Mark Bidwell. Now with me today is Heiko Fischer, who's a founder of a remarkable company called Resourceful Humans, which he's created and established based on the principles of the Hewlett-Packard way, which date back to the 1950s, as well as drawing on the management philosophies espoused in companies like Gore, and Ricardo Semler's Semco partners. And like me, he believes strongly that corporate culture is a source of competitive advantage. And based on his work as the head of HR for Europe's fastest growing video games company, as well as drawing on his experience in other companies like eBay and General Motors and Bayer, he now aims to hack corporate cultures with his philosophy called the RH way and develop cultures that are 100% entrepreneurial and 0% bureaucratic. So plenty of ambition with Heiko, and you'll hear in this interview how he goes about it. You know, a few things that really stand out for me. And firstly, what does corporate culture actually mean and look like in companies, and how do you hack it? Secondly, he focuses on 3 key pain points that the vast majority of organizations around the world are wrestling with. And we've touched on some of these in previous conversations. Useless meetings. This is a theme that came up in a number of talks, ranging all the way back to Steve Goldstein, all the way more recently to Caroline Webb. Secondly, the lack of feedback in organizations. And thirdly, broken or at least non-value adding performance management systems. The other thing that I found fascinating is, learning about the core principles that underpin the RH way. And one of them is autonomy. And again, we heard about this in previous interviews with Larry Cunningham and with Amantha Imber, who's Australian businesswoman of the year, I think 2015. The importance of transparency and, of course, the importance of keeping things small to maintain connectivity in the organization. So plenty to learn about here from Heiko Fischer. And without further ado, here we go. So hello, this is Mark Bidwell of the Innovation Ecosystem podcast. With me today is Heiko Fischer, who is founder of a company called Resourceful Humans. And he's been described by Gary Hamel, who's one of the world's most influential experts on strategy, as the Tony Stark of human resources. And if, like me, you don't know who Tony Stark is, he's the fictional superhero Iron Man from the American Marvel comic books. So, Heiko, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
And by the way, I also, once I tried to answer the question who Tony Stark is, I realized that Elon Musk was the inspiration for the most recent, the actor who was playing the most recent version of Tony Stark a few years ago in Iron Man, right? You were aware of that, right?
Yeah. And this is, as I'm sitting here in my office, I'm looking at a statue of the Iron Man suit that my team gifted to me to kind of hit the point home. And outside we have a Tesla Model S parking, so that's the brainchild of Elon Musk, the Tesla, the electric car company. And I feel a kinship to both of those very crazy people. And it's I think my team would say it's as much a curse as it's a blessing to have this very innovative person running around in the company, because it means that you have kind of a very short attention span for anything, and putting anything into action is a challenge, but I can come up with a lot of pretty good ideas. So that's the upside of it.
I don't think you're doing yourself, you're not doing yourself full justice, because some of the ideas that I've seen you've taught, and some of the products and the processes you've developed are pretty robust. So we'll get into that in a minute. But just while we're on the subject of Elon Musk, I'm hoping to have Ashley Vance on the biographer of Elon Musk on the show in the new year. So you are in good company. But so Heiko, the mantra of your company, which is called Resourceful Humans, is 100% entrepreneurship, 0% bureaucracy. So maybe you can just describe your journey in the workplace that concluded with setting up a company that lives by these two really important principles, if you like?
Gladly. So, I think there's a main takeaway for me. For my last employment was in a computer games company. It was in Europe's largest independent video game designer called Crytek. And I was the first HR director in that company. We scaled up rapidly from like 200 to 1,000 people within a couple of years, and just, was a crazy experience. And the one thing I took away from this video games world was that people don't think in processes, they think in experiences, the kind of stuff that happens to them, very visceral, not we always take the world in through our pathos, not our logos primarily, or, that's true for most of people. And I reflected on that for myself and looked back at my childhood, and I found that, the way I grew up was very much influenced by a dad who loved his work, who felt such a high level of identity with the company that he worked with, that the way I experienced the notion of work was completely different from what I think 99% of my co-students, for example, experienced, where their dad would come home and he'd be tired and maybe, open a beer and sit in front of the TV and just needed to slack off and kind of digest another horrible day in the office. Whereas mine came home with kind of spring in his step, he had this like, hi ho, it's off from work, I come. And, he would talk about the contributions that HP made to the world. He would talk about calculators that helped the space shuttle re-enter the atmosphere and all these crazy inventions that HP made. He never talked about being an HR guy, right? So for me, it was kind of a letdown when I heard that he's not an astronaut. He doesn't work for NASA, but he's an HR guy. But it shaped my reality that a company could actually be something that gives you energy. It's something that gives you purpose. It was something that gave energy and wealth to our family. I mean, we were able to travel around. I was able to live in foreign countries, learn different languages. But I always had this nucleus, this company, this HP way of experiencing the world. And there was such a strong management philosophy that was behind that, which was imbued by the founders, by Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, that I just had a very positive experience, unreflected experience of a company can positively influence a family, a young boy, and actually the community in which it operates, right? And so that was kind of like the nucleus of this 100% entrepreneurship and 0% bureaucracy, because I just kind of I was fed that with my mother milk in a way.
Yep. And you worked there as well for a period, didn't you?
Yeah, I worked there briefly until I found out that it's super stupid to work in a company where your father has been super successful and you even look like him, because every conversation starts with, you're just like your father, which at a certain point in your life is cool. And then from then on forward, you want to prove your own worth, and it kind of gets in your way. Yep. It was part of, my own emancipation process. At some point you have to kick the king off a throne and become your own king, but that's an entirely different podcast.
Yeah. But then you also went to, a big German company and then a big US company. So which is Bayer and General Motors. To what extent was this image of work as being a sort of force for good? Was that increased or decreased by those experiences? How did your thinking evolve by working in those two large companies?
Decrease is the wrong word. I think it got shattered, beaten, waterboarded, and electrocuted. It's So when I left HP, I really had this drive to say I want to start from the bottom. I had a great network through my dad, but I said I want to start in the trenches. I want to go my own way. I want to work from the bottom up, and that really was where I started in these companies. And they're huge. These are like 200,000 people plus companies. Or were at the time, and you really felt like a resource. You felt like number 3,581 on an Excel spreadsheet of a person that would be moved around, and if your voice was heard or not, who knows? You felt small, and the more you rebelled against it, the more it was put into focus just how meaningless and replaceable you were for these companies. That at least was my experience working there as a very junior person with extremely high ambitions of changing the world, and that kind of heritage that I had, right? Mm-hmm. So it was something that really, I think it gave me an against motivation. Like, this is what I don't want. This is what I would describe with this bureaucracy, when there's a system that actually works against a human way of working. It is completely geared toward a metric. It's geared towards maintaining a stock price, a shareholder value, but it doesn't really connect to the human being other than being a means to an end. And I couldn't have articulated it that way back then, but that's really what it gave me. These experiences was like, never like this. Mm-hmm. This is not the way organizations need to be structured to get us to the next level as a species.
So you had a good view of what you needed to move away from, and then I guess the next step is into this company which you mentioned earlier on, Crytek, which exploded in terms of growth in in 2008, I guess, right?
Yeah, it was a fantastically innovative company founded by three brothers. It was really like a garage story, right? They started out literally in the garage of their parents in a small town in Germany, and then it just went through the roof. But really, it was one of those companies that had the same drive as HP did back in the days, that they said, we don't want to be a me too. We want to define our industry. We want to break new ground and go somewhere where nobody had been before. So they were also open to not just disrupt their industry, they were open to disrupt the way they worked. And that's where we found to each other and said, look, if we want to become a company that brings network gaming to the world, we have to create a network game inside the company. And that game will be the ideal company culture. Because what these guys were saying when I talked to them and I asked them on day one, like, what's the best thing that I can do for you? I'm your new HR director. I'm like God's gift to this organization. And they said the best thing would be if you were not here, right? If there were no need for you, which was kind of like, that's not what you want to hear on your first day. Yeah. But they said, what you call management makes it hard for me to make kick-ass games, right? And that stuck with me. And I was really lucky that I had a fantastic team around me at the time who said, well, you always told us about this weird HP way, where the founder said, just set the overall objectives and then get out of the way of people and let them lead, right? So I sat down with the founders and I said, what if, just hear me out, what if we created a company where we don't scale into silos and matrices and all this, but what if we became a network of entrepreneurs where really each game project became a company within the company, and we drive this mindset of it's your game really down to every level. So we have leadership at every level. And they were just crazy enough and entrepreneurial enough to say, that is A, good business, and B, it's the right thing to do. That's how we grew up. That's how we became successful. We want to make other people successful. Right? So that was the real genesis of the 100% entrepreneurship and 0% bureaucracy mindset. So how do you craft such a culture? How do you design a workplace that can hold that promise? And I remember at the time I watched a video by an Austrian psychologist called Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm. The Man's Search for Meaning.
Exactly that one, yeah. And he speaks about his experience of learning to fly, right? And his flight instructor showed him how to approach a landing when you have crosswinds. And he says you basically have to aim for something that is further than the landing piece. You have to kind of overshoot it, and that will make you land in the right spot because you're crabbing into the wind. Whereas if you just aim for the piece, you'll be actually off course. And that was kind of the mental image for us to say, what if we strove for 100% entrepreneurship and 0% bureaucracy? We might just get out at that point of what this organization is maximum capable of. But if we approach this realistically, with all the crosswinds and the crazy world and everything that we have out there, we will actually not do justice to the potential of the people in this organization, and we will undercut ourselves. So let's go in with guns blazing, as high expectations as possible, and we'll come out with where we could be.
Yeah, yeah. And what was the end point of that? I mean, this was you in your bio. You talk about this as a successful experiment. And what did success look like for you?
unemployment.
Okay.
No, so the success was that we became superfluous as an HR team. So this was a 4-year track, basically, where at the end we had a self-sustaining ecosystem of entrepreneurial teams, a federation of teams in that company that needed very little central guidance, especially no shared services. So all the marketing and finances and HR competencies were actually repatriated back into the team. So they would recruit their own people. They would develop their own people. They would set their own salaries. Salaries were transparent. They had no vacation policy anymore. They could decide whoever takes vacation when. That was up to them. So we just radically simplified the organization. We added a lot of technology way before the whole digitalization buzzword came up. We were in a great position that we had a tech company at our fingertips. So a lot of those, tools to hack performance management and meeting management and feedback management, we could pioneer back then because we had the tech at our fingertips. And so we basically repatriated that back where we thought it belonged all along. And then kind of at the end of that journey, we're like, we succeeded. We are done. What now? And that basically became what is Resourceful Humans now. So
let's come to that in a minute, because I'd love to pick up on those three areas of meetings, performance management, and feedback. A little feedback, or poor feedback. But from just wrapping up this story here, if you don't mind, Heiko. You mentioned when we first met that corporate culture, can be seen as a source of competitive advantage. So, to what extent was Crytek able to convert this unique culture into competitive advantage in the marketplace? Are there any sort of business outcomes that you participated in creating that stand out in the story of Crytek?
Absolutely. So, apart from the fact that you can see it in the products themselves. So, if you actually go on the sites like Metacritic, which rate the games, so you will see that Crytek has a proven track record of extremely valued games. So what they came out with in a marketplace where you have such a schizophrenic value creation chain, which is you have to be super innovative on one side, so people actually want to buy your game, and on the other side, you have to be super on time and budget to actually get it out in a window of opportunity. Let's say for Christmas. This company consistently hit its deadlines and actually came out with games that were rated and reviewed as top of their class. So that just in terms of product, that's a validation of a culture that can sustain that in such a boom or bust industry. That is quite remarkable, and that's something anybody in this industry will tell you. But I think another thing is that recently they were acquired by Amazon.
Okay.
So I think that if you want to talk about success, that if a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon wants to buy you, it shows that you have a certain value and something to bring to the table. Not that I particularly like that outcome, but I think it speaks to the fact that they had something to offer. Yeah,
sure. So let's get into your company now, Resourceful Humans. Founded in late 2011, and I guess if I look at some of the materials, it's about hacking human behavior in the workplace, and you focus on three things, Heiko: useless meetings, three realities that perhaps you might have experienced in some of these large organizations you work with, but useless meetings, too little feedback, and non-value adding performance management. So maybe we can start with meetings, because there are the two biggest time wasters in the corporate world are meetings and email. And email, they say, I read something the other day that 28% of people's time is spent doing email. Meetings, probably 70% of a leader's time is spent either in meetings, preparing for meetings, or debriefing meetings. We all know what a bad meeting looks like. So tell us a little bit about how do you think about meetings, either internally or when you work with clients? Maybe from an industrial company that's got sort of maybe bad meeting practices, what kind of things are you able to do? What kind of outcomes are you able to create in this area? Because I think I would imagine that this is every single listener can roll their eyes when they think about meetings, and they can relate very strongly to useless meetings. So let's get into this subject.
Yeah, I think one thing that is important to put this in context of is that basically our main product or main service, if you want, next to the tools is a management framework, which we call the RH way. And this management philosophies founded in what we call the first principles. And that is something which actually goes back to Elon Musk, who you mentioned at the beginning of the show, where he said what we do way too often when we talk about, or we innovate, is we think by analogy rather than reasoning from the bottom up of, if you break things down to their very fundamental truth, then you can come up with stuff that is revolutionary rather than incremental in its nature. And we do that way too little. So we looked at the same thing for organizations, and we looked at what are the kind of the natural laws of organizations that are undisputed. So like, you can have an opinion on gravity, but gravity doesn't have an opinion on you. And we were wondering if that's the same is true for organizations. And we came up with 3 principles. So the first one is that if you give good people a choice or autonomy, then they will step up and they will act responsibly. And this has been true for all these maverick game changers that have been out there way before the digital age and that worked as entrepreneurial networks, like W.L. Gore, who did the Gore-Tex, the jackets and stuff like that. They're Morningstar company, one of the biggest tomato producers in the world. They all worked in that logic, and they had nothing to do with fancy startups or anything, right? So they've done this for decades. Semco, working in, marine heavy industry pumps and stuff like that. So, and the second principle that they applied was you have to give radical transparency on anything, on information, especially on process, progress, and results, because you can only increase the decision-making capability of a team if they can base their choices and the evolution of their choices on ever better information. And then you have accountability. So choices lead to responsibility, transparency leads to accountability. And then the third one is that you have to keep things small. You have to really keep things to a level where the human factor still works so that the connectivity thrives. And it doesn't matter if it's team size or task size. These things have to be extremely small, because nobody understands it when you say our goal by 2020 is 20 billion or something like that. You can't, your brain can't wrap itself around. So now we try to apply these first principles of such network organizations to the symptoms of bad culture, as we say, as you said, performance, feedback, and meetings. And I think a great example would be, it's a tech company, but it's a big tech company, so it's very bureaucratic. It's a SAP. So we work with the HR board member, Stefan Ries. And he said he wants to try this tool, this cards tool, because what he hates is that his teams very often get into this sort of consumer position, right? I come to your meeting and I will consume what you give me as the meeting host, and then I will say it sucks and that it burns my time and it wastes my time. So as consumers, they were unhappy with the meetings. As the host, Stefan was unhappy with the meetings because he said it feels like I push and I feed and all I get back is nothing, right? Lethargy and antagonism and stuff like that. So how can we actually get into a meeting where, if it were up to me, I would make no meetings. For me, I'm just trying to enable them to do their jobs, right? So why am I in this weird position of spoon feeding my senior leadership, right? So we said, okay, try this tool. What it does is the following. You log in as a meeting host, and you will have 4 cards on your virtual board, on your iPad, so to say. We're making things as simple as possible. We're honoring our values. We're very clear on follow-ups and owners, and the customer is at the center of this meeting. So if you log in now to this meeting, or if you're in the room, you will log in with your smartphone. You will have the same 4 cards on your phone, and you can swipe through them like Tinder style. And at any point when you feel that any of those statements are not true, like we're not honoring our values right now, or the customer is not at the center of the meeting, or we're not making this as simple as possible, you'll tap the card and the card will turn from green to red on your phone, as well as everybody else's, as well as the meeting host, who sees that Heiko just said that the meeting has lost sight of the customer, which begs the question, who is the customer of this meeting, right? Which you would be amazed to find that in any of the companies that we work with, when you come to that point to say, who are you serving with this meeting? People will be like, what do you mean? Like, what customer are we serving? Like, who does this benefit specifically? Like, if I go to to a shop, let's say in our experience with T-Mobile, right? If I buy an iPhone or a contract with T-Mobile, how do they benefit from this particular meeting? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, they don't. This is about an internal issue. We're like, okay, then basically this meeting should be redundant, right? If you cannot relate its value to an actual customer experience, even indirectly, then you should question the existence of this meeting. And this is super hard for people to actually put their actions into connection to an actual customer, because we've become so used to serving our internal mechanisms and processes that's not the mindset that we approach stuff with. I mean, we've had fantastic experiences on the board level where you have to imagine you kind of have to hold them to this tool in the beginning, because they will say, the tool sucks, this is not useful, go away with it. And you're like, no, we've committed to this, so now go through it. And the card for the customer is still red. And somebody burst out. I mean, this is a C-level of a DAX company, like a Fortune 500 company in Germany, right? And he says, well, I don't have time for the customer in my job. You're like, hey, hold. Now, everybody just hold and reflect on that for a second, right? In terms of you're the leader of this company, and you just said you don't have time for the customer. Who pays your salary, you think? You know, and then they will like, it's group headquarters. Like, no, man, your salary is paid by the customer, and you're forgetting about that in your leadership practice. Right?
And there, I guess, therein lie the roots from Hewlett-Packard, right? I mean, that's a very HP based approach, I guess, for why businesses exist ultimately.
The customer defines a job well done. The purpose of a company is not to make money. The purpose of a company is to contribute something to a customer. And that customer decides if you are in the market or not. You know, today I just saw that picture of the Stephen Elop, the Nokia CEO, who said, we haven't done anything wrong and still we've lost. We're out of the game. Why? They've lost touch with their customer, right? They lost that next step that they wanted. And if you're too preoccupied with your internal organization, you're too in love with your own product, you feel too secure, you will lose that touch. And this tool is a prime example of holding people accountable to, you are here to serve a customer need. And if you're not doing that, you're currently wasting your time. We've actually built that in the system so that if you have the right information feeding into it, you have the right interface, it's an optional feature, the tool will tell you how much money you're currently burning, because it will calculate the salaries of the people participating in the meeting. So instead of telling you you have 15 minutes left, it will tell you have burned 450,000 euros at this point. Do you feel the outcome is worth it?
Yeah, and I can imagine this creates some kind of existential angst amongst executives, because many of them probably look at their agendas and realize that none of their meetings have anything to do with the customers at all. So there is that pivot, I should imagine, that you have in large companies like SAP, where slowly the organization wakes up to this reality. And what's the end part of the story with SAP? Have they embraced it, and is there a real shift going on in the culture based on this intervention, this tool that you use to intervene?
Well, in this particular case, it really was an intervention, because I think it was too crass for them. It was just really, you can only shift the culture so much. But I'm hopeful Stefan is going to take this to the next level. But it leads to exactly what you were saying. That the problem is that you start arguing with a tool. Well, what you're actually arguing with is you're arguing with your culture and your leadership model, right? And that's where we're saying you have to move away from this leader-follower model to a leader-leader model. So you actually have to give people the choice to participate in meetings or not. And that's where that next level comes in. So this was actually a feature inspired by eBay. I worked for eBay briefly, and I had a fantastic manager. At the end of each meeting, she would hold her supervisory team accountable to the meeting and say, now we go once around the table, and you have to score the meeting on a scale from 1 to 3. 1, the meeting was useless. 2, it was somewhat helpful. Or 3, it was really meaningful, really valuable. So we went around, and usually, just like Stefan's experience, we would be like 1, maybe a 2. It was a good day, right? 1. Mm-hmm. And then she would be like, okay, now tell me what you've contributed to making this a valuable meeting. 1, nothing. 2, a little bit, and 3, I gave it all I could. And obviously we're like, damn it, like 1. somebody would say 3 and we'd immediately shoot them down and go, no, you didn't. So and the system tracks that, right? And it will show you and say your average meeting score as a host is a 1.2 and the average participation of people is 1.0. So people don't participate and it's meaningless meetings. And then it will actually tell you that if you stay below that threshold for too many meetings, you can't do invitations anymore. You cannot host meetings anymore. If you are not participating, if you're not contributing to making it meaningful meetings. Now you confuse me with the Tony Stark and the Marvel thing. Yep. So if you don't contribute, you cannot participate in meetings anymore as a participant either. So it holds you literally accountable to your actions and not your words, right? And that's where people say, well, but I'm not empowered to make those decisions. Well, that's where the leadership comes in to say, yes, you have to be able to empower people to say, no, I'm not going to participate in that meeting because that host burns my time. I can show you his track record. Or, no, I refuse you to join this meeting because I see that you're never contributing value to meetings. So I'm free to exclude you from it. This, of course, is not nice, and a lot of these other things that we're seeing, like that there's too little feedback flying around in organizations. It has to do with the fact that these courageous conversations are very tough for us to have in organizations. We're talking about being nice to each other, about being human, but being honest. That's something that we're not very good with, right? Being critically, but positively, constructively critical with each other, very hard to do. And these tools force you to do that. They literally hack the system to create such a transparency, and they take all the excuses away for it to work if you want it to work, if you have the competencies to make it work. But it brutally exposes if you lack either the will or the ability to do it, right?
So if we've got let's say we've got a team leader listening, thinking, well, what can they do now to begin to hack the system, if you like? I mean, I think you mentioned earlier on that you've got a sort of a hack template. Maybe we can make this available in the show notes, but can you just give an example of how someone, let's say in a large German DAX company, feeling a long way away from the customer and from any sense of mission, perhaps, your experience between working in HP and working in Crytek, people in that situation, what can they do this afternoon or tomorrow morning with this tool that they can download to bring a little bit of life back into their meeting worlds, if you like?
Well, I think the first thing is to actually simply use it and see what your score would be, right? If you're brutally honest with yourself and you say, okay, in this meeting we're going to go in and we're actually going to define what customer would pay for this, right? Like, let's say you work for Mercedes or something and say somebody's going to buy a new C-Class and they would witness us having this meeting, and this meeting makes the C-Class 100 euros more expensive. Would they say, yeah, that's a valuable meeting to have because it will invest in a safety feature that might save my life, I will pay for this? Or will it add nothing to them, right? And try to really reason through that, because it's hard if you're especially the further you're away from production or design, if you're an internal organization, to challenge yourself to say, even if it is by 3 degrees of separation or 6 degrees of separation, try to connect what you're doing in this meeting to what the customer experiences with your product or service. And from that rationale, now work back and score yourself honestly. Did you achieve that? Would the customer score you the same point? And then set yourself a target and say, you know what, we sucked now. We got a 1.2 and a 1. By the end of this month, we want to get up to a 2. We want to make this somewhat valuable, right? But for that, you have to clearly define who your customer actually is and how you want to contribute to that. And this is in computer games, you always start from the gamer's perspective. You don't make a game because you think it's cool, but you make a user story. You say, as a role-playing gamer, I want to experience an endless world where I can be a green orc, something like that. So obviously not that. But in the end, to say, to feel completely immersed in a game world and feel bigger than I am currently, whatever. But if you can create a user story to say, as a person who's buying a Mercedes, I would invest in this meeting because it gives me X, Y, Z. then you've cracked it, right? And all these tools that we're creating are ultimately training wheels. We want them we want them to become instinctive, intrinsic behavior. You shouldn't need the tool at some point anymore. It should be obvious that you think about, does this meeting add value or not? And if not, make it optional for people to come. And if there's one hack that I would offer in terms of the meeting culture, is make it optional for your people to come to the meetings that you as a team lead hold, and see who shows up.
You're creating an internal marketplace, essentially.
Exactly, right? And because then it becomes, you become literally a servant leader, because you have to inquire. You have to ask and say, okay, nobody showed up to my last team meeting. Why? What would I need to do to make this valuable? And have shitty times, make it like a 9 o'clock in the morning meeting. Make it unpleasant for people to be there, so you can really gauge if the value is there. Would they get up at an earlier time to come to your meeting because they really feel like, if I'm not there, I'm missing out. Don't make it attractive. Don't bring pizza. Make it about the core of the meeting. Do you add value to your team as a leader? And do you have a feeling that they're there because they want to, they see that purpose, they want to contribute to that purpose, or are they there because they have to be? And
this, the servant leadership, this model is, we're not going to have time to get into it, but it's based on the work by the book called Turn the Ship Around by David
McKay,
yeah. In 30 seconds, we'll put that in the show notes as well, because I think it's an important book. But in 30 seconds, can you just describe that model? What's unique about that model?
Well, David took the worst performing submarine of the U.S. Navy, and within about a year, he turned it into the best performing submarine in the fleet ever. So an incredible turnaround story. And what he did was, he refused to give orders. He only asked questions. He forced his team to become autonomous. And he said there's two pillars for that: clarity and competence, right? So if the people are competent in their jobs and I have given them a clear mission, then I have to get out of their way. And that goes right back to what we talked about with HP. And when David and we talked about our partnership, and he said, this RH way is the way to create leadership at every level. And that's how we blew every other ship out of the water. My teams didn't have to wait for the orders of the captain. They acted. And that's why we were faster and better and stronger than any other ship in the fleet, because no matter how good the captain, we were a tidal wave because we acted autonomously. People had the choice to do what they felt was best, and they aligned amongst themselves.
Yeah, and that gets back to the where a corporate culture or a culture on this nuclear submarine was a source of competitive advantage in that environment, essentially.
And it proves out that it doesn't have anything to do with your industry. It doesn't matter if you're a fancy startup, if you're in retail, if you're in heavy production, or if you're a highly hierarchical Navy, military, submarine environment. It's even, I would even dare to say, the more adverse the environment, the higher the likelihood for success, because people really want to change something, right? If you're doing fine because you're sitting in a fancy Berlin startup office and you have your foosball tables and your sushi, then why rock the boat, right? But David and his crew, they felt like they didn't just want to rock the boat, they wanted to rock the fleet, right? And they did.
Yeah. Wonderful. Heiko, so let's begin to wrap up. One final question before I get to the questions that I sent across. You've got, I think, 5 children. Is that up to date?
All the ones I know about, yeah.
So, you've been studying, how work, and you've been actively involved in shaping, the world of work. What kind of, what can the next generation expect? What are your expectations for the kinds of workplaces that your kids will find themselves in? And it's a hugely broad question, but are you optimistic that some of the things you're talking about are actually resonating, and with the technology, with the gamification, with the millennials coming to the marketplace, that this wave has been unleashed? Although you can't unleash a wave, but you know what I mean. Or are you kind of deeply concerned that you're just looking through at the very, very small proportion of workplace environments, and the status quo will remain more characteristic of some of those big German and American companies you worked for?
No, absolutely. This is coming. This is it's inevitable at this point, and the pace is picking up. And certainly, we will do this, or we'll die trying. But from what I can see is that, we did it ourselves at Crytek. Then we worked with a small to medium-sized business like Swiss Hotel or Haufe in Switzerland. We proved out you can do it externally. Then we stepped it up and we showed you can do it in a big company within a group at T-Mobile. And we're currently having a very, very interesting project with Accenture, and that's 400,000 people globally. And I think once the first big domino falls, you're going to see just a cascade of things happening in a chain reaction. But the best way I can put this really is that to kind of circle back to the beginning, what I learned from my dad and what I learned from HP and the HP way was that you create spaces in which the next generation can build something into. Don't build it for them. They're going to destroy it anyways, and that's the way to do it. But when I talk to my daughter, my 14-year-old, she's incredibly smart, probably smarter than me already at this point, not that hard. But I was invited to a diversity panel, and it was just white dudes in the diversity panel talking about women and how to, create quotas so women can make it in the workplace and stuff. And they gave us a question that we should answer at the end, which is, what would the next generation expect from us? So I asked my daughter, and I said, hey, I'm going there, and I'm talking about diversity. So what do you want me to tell these guys? What should they do for you so you can succeed as the next generation? And she said something which for me sums up the whole topic, which is, just leave me alone. I'll take care of it myself.
But as you say, create the space for them to play, but don't get in the way of them, essentially.
Yeah, and in the RH way logic, you would call this the shit list and the wish list, right? And what we see in organizations is people don't want you to add too much stuff. If you actually removed a lot of the nonsense that you're doing currently, things would already go a lot better. Yep. If you just removed barriers instead of adding super fancy new stuff, and I think that's what my daughter essentially said, is if you removed some of the major hurdles, some of the major obstacles, I can create my own best environment. And I think that is something that would set our management philosophy apart from something like holacracy, which is, again, very prescriptive as a new model. And we're saying this needs to be an organizational future created of, for, and by the teams themselves.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah. So Heiko, let's just get into the three questions, if we can, to wrap this up. I mean, what have you changed your mind about recently?
Well, in the light of Brexit and Donald Trump,
I should have put a non-political frame around that question.
No, but I think it's inevitable because I cannot name other instances in my life that, let's forget 9/11 or fall off the wall, but something that has, as an adult man, impacted me so much that I doubted the society I live in. You start looking over your shoulder, like, could that be a Trump voter? Could that be somebody who voted for Brexit? Why would you do that in a day and age like this? And I think what I really changed my mind about is that we are, as a society, at a tipping point again. And I think we always have these evolutionary bursts. And I think right now, with the interconnected world, we are at such a tipping point, and there are those who are disenfranchised. Those who are not. They're not connected to the wealth and prosperity and the positive outlook of what that world might create. They might not have had the experience and the good fortune I've had through HP and my family. And they're just sitting there going, what's everybody so happy about? I want things to go back to how they were when I felt like I had a grip, this positive nostalgia, which might be true or not. But in the past, I always had the feeling, only go with the people who go forward, always forward, right? But I think what we're seeing right now is a backlash from people who are saying, you can go screw yourself with your forward. I'm going to hold you back. And we're a sizable part of this country. And we also have a voice, right? And I think if we don't engage in dialogue with people who we might find despicable, who Hillary Clinton called what was her term for them?
I think it was deplorable, wasn't it?
The deplorables, the bunch of deplorables, right? Those are human beings, and they have, for whatever reason, a good mind to vote for Donald Trump, whatever that might be. We have to engage with them. As much as we go forward, we can say what we think is the right side of history. You can't call the other side foolish, stupid, and backwards, because that that will divide the world in two, and that will not work, right?
Yep.
We have to somehow, I've changed my mind about, you have to engage these people and you have to talk to them. You can't ignore them or label them as idiots.
Yeah, yeah. Which I guess, presumably has implications in your work when you're, people resist change for all sorts of reasons. And when you're going to a 400,000 employee company, which with very high standards of performance, I mean, not everyone's going to go with you, to the new future. So I guess there's also a change management lesson in there as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I have to tell you that one of the biggest lessons that we took away from the T-Mobile story was that the level of cynicism that you encounter in these organizations about, oh, here comes another company that is going to consult us on the future of work. There's going to be another set of PowerPoints. There's going to be another set of something that ultimately results into layoffs, rationalizations, and budget cuts, right? So don't give me the spiel. Just tell me how many people I have to let go, right? So to actually make it over that hurdle, and we had to create a very strong symbol. And what the CEO at the time, Mark Klein, and the head of the Workers' Council, Emma Chapman, did was they created what they called an asshole list, right? They said, we have the same 10 people holding us back for the past 5 years, but they're top performers, right? So we have to engage with them, and we have to say, do you actually realize, have you been given the feedback that people hate you, that they feel that you perform on their backs rather than through enabling them? And we want to tell you that we will give you the chance because we've groomed this behavior to change. But if you don't change within this time frame and with this help, you will be out of this organization. And that actually turned heads when the first people who were resistant to this also were shown the door. But they were shown so respectfully. The dialogue had been there. The chance, the opportunity to turn their ship around had been there, right? And to do that in a human way, but then to say, sorry, but now we're going forward in another way, hugely powerful.
Yeah, yeah, and we didn't touch the non-value adding performance management piece, but I mean that's a great example of what it actually could look like in extreme circumstances. Yeah. Second question then: what do you do to remain creative and innovative?
A lot. I think the answer is do as much as possible, right? So, I have the fortune and the misfortune, depending which day of the week you ask me, that my wife is extremely different from me. So if you introduce me with the analogy of Tony Stark at the beginning, then the rest of the team calls her Pepper, who in the movie is the sidekick or the foundation to Tony Stark's success, because he doesn't remember his social security number and he can't tie his shoelaces, but she's the one who gives a crazy guy structure. But she's very, very different from me. So her interests are elsewhere always, and she will always kick my butt to do different things and explore very different areas that I have a blind eye to. So I think the more you do interdisciplinary, the more expose yourself to stuff that you would never ever do, the more literally synapses in your brain fire, and the more ideas will come up. And one fantastic example from David Marquet when he came visit us in Berlin and we went for dinner is that he always lets the waiter or the waitress choose dinner for him. So he will say, I don't like fish, but anything else on the menu, look at me and tell me what you would get and then go and do it. And he said the only caveat is, I would like you to later tell me why you chose that for me, right? And those are things where take a different way to work. Try to find 10 different ways to work. Have somebody else choose your food. Try a sport this weekend that you've never done. For me, as you mentioned, I have 5 kids, so I'm trying to engage with my kids on everything. My kids are the first people I let test our new products, because I'm saying if they have to engage with a C-level, it's better that a 4-year-old can explain it too, because that's about the same attention span, right? So it's fantastic to look at how a 3-year-old or an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old look at the world and look at your products or stuff like that, and play. Yeah. Just play a lot. Yeah.
Lovely.
Lego, whatever. Yeah.
And then final question, I mean, you might have already answered this, but let's ask it again. I mean, to what do you attribute your success in life? I mean, do you have any specific skills, habits, or mindsets, that you've mastered, that you think you've mastered, that have had a significant impact?
Well, what I put down to this question was an inspiration to me was a guy called Sir Richard Francis Burton, who was a traveler, I think 18th century, and he was in the army, and he was one of those real Renaissance men. I think he spoke 26 languages, and he was in the East India Company, and he traveled through 100 different countries. And if I had to point to a success formula of my life, is exposing myself to a lot of different cultures, living in Spain, in Egypt, in France, in the United States, Switzerland, learning the language, learning the culture, trying to immerse yourself in the culture to a point where even as a 6'4" white dude with blue eyes, you become as indistinguishable as possible from the rest. It shows you about walking in someone else's shoes. And it in terms of working as a leader or as an entrepreneur, consulting others in being successful, trying to enable them to be successful, this adaptability to cultures and becoming native, but still retaining your identity so you can give perspective to those people. Traveling and learning languages, that will be my answer.
Love it. Brilliant. So, Heiko, where can people get in touch with you?
Well, I think the easiest bit is that if they go on our website, which I guess you will link.
Show notes, yep.
Otherwise, really I'm happy to engage with anybody personally, so just send me an email at heiko@resourceful-humans.com, and we're going to come out with something fantastic, and I just want to advertise that here because there's a great way to get to know us, to get to know the companies that we work with. We've, in honor of Jerry Seinfeld, who has a fantastic show that you should watch. It's called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. Watch the Barack Obama episode. It's fantastic. We've created a show called Leaders in Cars Getting Coffee. And our first ride is with David Marquet, the submarine commander, who will tell us about how he turned his ship around. And he will do so in Elon Musk's car, in the Tesla Model S. So we have the perfect tie and ribbon to your introduction here.
Brilliant.
All these game changers are in there. Tony Stark in a car with David Marquet in a Tesla Model S, which is Elon Musk's car. There, mic drop.
Brilliant. So that's and we'll link to those on the show notes as well. But yeah, I mean, Heiko, this has been great. I mean, it's been a fantastic conversation. Sorry it's cut short, but a lot more here for people to dig into. We'll put everything in the show notes. Really appreciate your time, your openness, and thanks very much for coming on the show.
Fantastic. It was a lot of fun. Thank you very much, Mark.
Great. Have a good day. Bye.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Mark again. So, plenty in here. Things that really stood out for me. I mean, again, the corporate culture can be a strong competitive advantage in the marketplace. In the large companies, and bear in mind he is dealing with some enormously large and complex organizations, but demonstrating that they can be restructured to mirror networks of entrepreneurial startups connected by a single purpose. And by applying RH's 3 principles of autonomy, of radical transparency, and of keeping things small, we can really revolutionize work cultures. And I really loved the conversation, the technology he uses for meetings, and the conversations of, the discussions of how does that play out in some boardrooms of some of Europe's largest companies, such as SAP, Mercedes-Benz. Really interesting how he is using technology to fundamentally change the corporate culture through the lens of the meeting, which, as we've heard on previous episodes, people spend, particularly executives, can spend up to 80% of their times either in meetings or preparing for meetings or debriefing meetings. So this is a great window into the culture of an organization, the meeting, but it's also a great lever for making change, and Heiko talks about that. Fantastic stuff. So hope you enjoyed the conversation. I'd urge you to join the conversation in the innovation ecosystem by signing up to our newsletter, www.innovationecosystem.com. Leave some comments on our website, join the conversation in the LinkedIn group, on Facebook, on Twitter, and really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on this particular interview. It was fresh, it was exciting, it was dynamic, and Heiko's doing some great things in the market. I've got no doubt we'll hear a lot more about him. He's also got a book in progress, so perhaps when that hits the shelves, we'll have him back on to tell us a little bit more about the fantastic results that he's generating in the marketplace. Until next time, have a great week.